Alex traced the rim of the cold coffee mug with a thumb, the motion, a familiar, thoughtless ritual in the pre-dawn quiet of his cabin. Outside, the world was a study in gray and white. The pines of the North Carolina mountains burdened with a fresh coat of snow that had fallen silently through the night. Inside, the silence was of a different sort. It was a structured, disciplined void, one he had built himself, brick by painstaking brick, over the past 2 years. His life was a fortress of solitude, and the silence was its highest wall. The cabin was small, but he kept it with the precision of a barracks inspection. The floor was swept, the single bed was made with hospital corners, and the wood for the stove was stacked in perfect, geometric chords. It was an armor of order against the chaos that still churned deep within his gut, a ghost army forever marching through the ruins of his memory. He was 43, though the lines etched around his eyes and the silver creeping at his temples spoke of a much older war. His body, honed by 2 decades as a Navy SEAL, was still a weapon, broad-shouldered and capable, but his spirit felt like a decommissioned vessel, moored in a forgotten harbor and left to rust. The mission was over, all of them, the ones in dusty, sun-scorched countries, and the final, impossible mission of trying to hold on to a life that had slipped through his fingers like sand. He looked at the empty armchair by the fireplace, its worn floral pattern, a splash of unwelcome color in the room's muted tones. It had been hers, Maria's. Sometimes in the deepest troughs of the night, he thought he could still see the indentation her head had made in the cushion. Beside it, on the floor, was a space that was even emptier. A space where a braided rug should have been, where a loyal shepherd named Rex, his partner through 3 tours, should have been lying. But the rug was gone, and Rex was gone, lost to the same fire and shrapnel that had taken 2 of his men. The griefs were separate, yet they had merged into a single, monolithic sorrow, a glacier inside his chest that had frozen everything. A phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, an intrusion he resented. It was his sister Chloe. He let it go to voicemail, as he always did. Her messages were always the same, bright bursts of concern that felt like someone trying to light a match. In a vacuum, she worried. She wanted him to come down from his mountain to rejoin the world, but the world was a language he no longer spoke. Here the wind and the pines and the crackle of the fire were the only conversations he needed. He finished his coffee, the bitter liquid doing little to warm him, and stood. It was time for his perimeter check. It was a habit ingrained from a different life, a patrol of his 10 acres that served no tactical purpose here, but it gave the morning a mission, a shape. He pulled on his worn boots, the leather stiff from the cold, and grabbed the heavy canvas jacket that hung from a peg by the door. He did not bother with the hat or gloves. The cold was an old comrade. It kept him sharp, focused. The air outside was a physical blow, clean and mercilessly cold. Stole the breath from his lungs and turned his exhales into plumes of white vapor. The snow was deeper than he had anticipated, already halfway to his knees, and the sky was a low, bruised ceiling of pewter. Another storm was moving in, a bigger one. He could feel it in the pressure of the air, a familiar tension before an operation. He began his circuit, his long strides eating up the ground, his path the only disturbance in the perfect, unbroken blanket of white. His thoughts, as they often did on these walks, drifted to Rex. He remembered the weight of the dog's head on his knee, the quiet intelligence in his amber eyes, the sheer uncomplicated loyalty that had been a bedrock in a life built on shifting sands. He had lost men, friends, but the loss of that dog had carved out a unique and hollow space inside him. It was a betrayal of a sacred trust. He was supposed to protect his partner. He had failed. He was nearing the southern edge of his property, where an old logging trail wound its way down toward the valley, when a sound snagged his attention. It was faint, almost lost. Beneath the sighing of the wind through the snow-laden branches, a whine, high-pitched and desperate. He stopped, head cocked, every nerve ending suddenly alight. His training took over, silencing the churn of memory and replacing it with pure, cold analysis. Animal, wounded most likely. A coyote caught in a trap, perhaps, or a deer hit by one of the few cars that ventured up this far. His first instinct, the one cultivated by his self-imposed exile, was to turn back. It was not his concern. The mountain had its own brutal calculus of life and death, but the sound came again, sharper this time, laced with a thread of unmistakable panic. It scraped at something inside him, a rusty lever he had thought long seized. He changed course, moving toward the sound, with the silent, efficient grace that had kept him alive in places far more dangerous than this. The whining grew louder, joined now by a series of frantic, muffled yelps. He pushed through a thicket of rhododendron, their broad leaves heavy with snow, and saw it. Beneath the tangled roots of a massive fallen oak, a dark shape was huddled in a hollow scraped out of the frozen earth. It was a German shepherd, her coat matted with snow and mud. She was impossibly thin, her ribs a stark cage beneath her fur, and a dark frozen stain marred the snow near her back leg. But it was not her own pain that fueled the desperate sounds. Huddled against her belly, wriggling for warmth, were three tiny puppies, their eyes barely open. The mother dog lifted her head as he approached. A low growl rumbled in her chest, a pathetic show of defiance from a body that was clearly shutting down. Her amber eyes, so much like Rex's, locked onto his. He saw no aggression in them. He saw only a profound, bottomless exhaustion and a primal terror for the small, helpless lives that depended on her. He stopped a few yards away, holding his hands out, palms open, a universal gesture of peace he had used 100 times with wary villagers and suspicious children. "Easy, girl," he said, his voice a rough rasp from disuse. "I'm not going to hurt you." The wind gusted, whipping snow into his face, and the puppies whimpered, a chorus of misery. He saw their fate laid out as clearly as a mission briefing. The mother was fading. Without her, they would freeze or starve within hours. The new storm would be their tomb. In that moment, looking into the fading light of the mother's eyes, the glacier in his chest cracked. It was not a thought, not a decision, but a reflex. It was the same instinct that had made him run toward gunfire, the same duty that had bound him to his men, to his partner. He saw not a stray dog, but a soldier holding the line to her last breath. He saw a mother protecting her children. He saw a life, several lives, that he could actually save. For the first time in 2 years, Alex had a mission. He shrugged off his heavy jacket, the sudden cold a bracing shock against his flannel shirt. The fortress walls were crumbling. He was going in. The approach was a delicate operation. The mother dog watched his every move, her growl a constant, weak vibration. He moved slowly, deliberately, avoiding any sudden movements that could be interpreted as a threat. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice low and steady, the same tone he had used to calm a young seal in his first firefight. "I'm here to help." He knelt in the snow, the cold seeping instantly through the knees of his jeans. He could see the puppies more clearly now. 2 were dark like their mother, but one was a lighter sable, and seemed to be pushing and squirming with more vigor than the others. The foolish hero, he thought, a flicker of an old categorization rising in his mind. One of the others was preternaturally still, watching him with wide, dark eyes full of a terror that seemed far too old for such a tiny creature. The watchful soul. He extended a hand, not toward the puppies, but toward the mother. He let her see it, smell it. She flinched, but the growl subsided into a low whine. Her nose twitched, and then with an effort that seemed to cost her everything, she stretched her neck and nudged his fingertips with her cold, wet nose. It was a surrender, a transfer of command. The touch was a spark against the flint of his frozen heart, and for a fleeting, dizzying second, the image of Rex's wet nose in his palm, moments before the end, flashed through his mind. He pushed it down, locking it away. This was not about the past. This was about the now. He worked quickly, his movements economical. The mother was too weak to walk. and carrying her and 3 puppies through the deepening snow would be impossible. He would have to make 2 trips, the puppies first. He reached for the squirming sable-colored one. The mother whined but did not resist. The puppy was a tiny trembling bundle of fur and bone. Its paws scrabbled against his rough hands, and it let out a surprisingly loud yelp of protest. He tucked it inside his flannel shirt, against the warmth of his skin. Next, took the second dark one, who was quieter, and finally the still, watchful one. This last one, Shadow as he had already named him in his mind, trembled violently as he lifted him, but did not make a sound. It was as if he had already accepted the world was a place of terrifying giants and cold hands. Alex held the tiny creature a moment longer, a fierce, unexpected wave of protectiveness washing over him. He felt an immediate, inexplicable kinship with this small, traumatized soul. He zipped his jacket most of the way up, creating a makeshift pouch for the 3 shivering bodies. "I'll be back for you," he promised the mother, looking her directly in the eye. "I give you my word." Her gaze held his, a flicker of understanding, or maybe just hope, in their depths. The journey back to the cabin was a brutal slog. The snow was falling heavily now. Thick, wet flakes that obscured the landscape and clung to his eyelashes. The wind had teeth. He navigated by instinct, his internal compass honed by years of moving through hostile territory in the dead of night. The warmth of the puppies against his chest was a strange and unsettling sensation. It was life, fragile and demanding, and it was a responsibility he had not sought, but now held literally close to his heart. He burst through the cabin door, bringing a swirl of snow and frigid air into his sterile sanctuary. He gently deposited the puppies into an old cardboard box he had kept for kindling, lining it with a clean towel from the bathroom. They huddled together, a miserable, shivering pile. The sable one, Buddy, immediately tried to climb out, his tiny legs scrabbling uselessly against the cardboard. Shadow curled into the tightest possible ball in the corner, trying to disappear. Alex didn't have time to linger. He grabbed a thick wool blanket from his bed, one Maria had bought on a trip to Ireland, and a length of rope from his utility closet. He also grabbed the faded silk scarf that lay folded in her top drawer. He had not touched it in 2 years. He didn't know why he took it, only that it felt necessary. The return trip was even worse. The world had dissolved into a maelstrom of white. Visibility was near zero. He followed his own tracks, a lifeline back to the fallen oak. His face was numb, and the cold had begun to sink deep into his bones. He found the mother exactly where he had left her, her head now resting in the snow, her body dusted with a fresh layer of white. For a heart-stopping moment, he thought he was too late. He knelt beside her, his hand going to her neck. A faint, thready pulse fluttered against his fingertips. "Okay, girl, let's get you home." He grunted, the words torn away by the wind. He managed to slide the heavy wool blanket beneath her, a difficult task given her dead weight in the awkward space. He wrapped her securely, then fashioned the rope into a makeshift harness to drag her. As he prepared to pull, he noticed one of the puppies had somehow wriggled free from the initial huddle, and was now lying near the mother's head, cold and still. It was Shadow. Alex's heart seized. He gently picked up the tiny body. It was limp, frighteningly so. Without thinking, he unwrapped Maria's silk scarf, carefully bundled the puppy in it, tucking it deep inside his own shirt, hoping his body heat could perform a miracle. The silk was soft against his skin, and a faint ghost of her perfume, a scent he thought he had forgotten, rose up and ambushed him. It was lavender and vanilla, a scent of quiet evenings and shared warmth. A wave of grief, sharp and debilitating, hit him so hard he staggered. He clenched his jaw, forcing it back. There was no time for ghosts. He had a promise to keep. He leaned into the rope, his boots slipping in the snow, and began to drag the heavy bundle toward the cabin. Every step was a battle against the storm, the weight, and the sudden, crippling onslaught of memory. The wind howled like a legion of banshees, and the cold was a physical enemy trying to sap his strength, to make him lie down and surrender. But the image of those amber eyes, the feeling of that cold nose against his hand, the fragile weight of the puppies against his chest, it was a new kind of fuel. This was not about enduring, it was about delivering. He was no longer a man adrift, he was a rescue vessel in a hurricane, and his cargo was precious. He fixed his eyes on the blurry shape of his own cabin, a distant lighthouse in the blizzard, and pulled. He finally collapsed through the door, dragging the mother dog inside and slamming it shut against the raging storm. He lay on the floor for a long moment, chest heaving, muscles screaming, the silence of the cabin roaring in his ears. The mission was complete. Phase 1. Anyway. He pushed himself to his feet, his body aching. The chaos he had brought in was an assault on the senses. Mud and snow melted on his immaculate floor. The smell of wet dog filled the air. The puppies were whimpering in their box. He carefully unwrapped the mother dog on the floor near the wood stove, the warmest spot in the cabin. Her breathing was shallow, but her eyes were open. She looked from him to the box of puppies and back again, a silent question. "They're okay," he said, his voice raw. He gently retrieved the 3 pups from his shirt. Buddy immediately began to nose around looking for a meal. The other dark puppy followed suit. Alex held Shadow still wrapped in the silk scarf, in the palm of his hand. The puppy was warmer now, and a faint tremor ran through its tiny body. It was alive. A profound, almost painful sense of relief washed through him. He placed Shadow with his siblings, who immediately began to nurse, their tiny mouths working with desperate energy. The mother licked them weakly, her tail giving a single, feeble thump against the wooden floor. Alex felt his own internal armor crack a little wider. He had breached his own perimeter, and now the wild, messy, beautiful chaos of life was inside the wire. He spent the next hour in a flurry of unpracticed, clumsy activity. He warmed some water and gently cleaned the mother's wounded leg. It was a deep gash, infected and swollen, but not, he thought, broken. He had no dog food, so he opened a can of chicken soup, draining the broth into a bowl. The mother lapped at it weakly, the first real nourishment she had likely had in days. The sterile order of his cabin was a distant memory. His floor was a mess of muddy paw prints and drips of water. The air was thick with the scent of dog and chicken broth, and in the center of it all, by the fire, was this small, broken family he had dragged in from the storm. He sank into his own armchair, the one opposite Maria's, and watched them, a strange feeling stirring in his chest. It was not happiness, not yet. It was a sense of purpose, a weight that was both a burden and an anchor. The storm outside continued its assault, but for the first time in a long time, the storm inside him had begun to quiet. The next 2 days were a blur of rudimentary caregiving. The storm trapped them completely, burying his truck in a 4-foot drift and cutting off the power. Alex operated by the light of the fire and a single kerosene lamp, his life shrinking to the needs of his 4 charges. He learned the rhythm of the puppies, the frantic nursing, the long stretches of sleep, the clumsy wrestling matches, initiated almost exclusively by Buddy. The sable pup was a miniature tempest of unthinking bravery, constantly trying to escape the box, tumbling over his siblings, and attempting to play with the tip of the mother dog's tail. Alex found himself watching the pup's antics with a strange, detached amusement, a ghost of a smile touching his lips before he was even aware of it. His primary focus, however, was Shadow. The small dark puppy remained withdrawn, eating less than the others and flinching at any sudden movement or loud noise. He would watch Alex with those solemn, ancient eyes, a mirror of the man's own guarded soul. Alex found himself talking to the puppy in low tones, telling him it was all right, that he was safe. He would scoop Shadow up, still wrapped in Maria's scarf, and hold him against his chest while he stoked the fire. The puppy's small, warm weight, a comfort he had not realized he was missing. He was forging a silent pact with this tiny, fearful creature. He would be the protector Shadow needed, the one he himself had failed to be for Rex. The mother, whom he had started calling Sheba, was slowly regaining her strength. She was a model of quiet dignity, never complaining, her gratitude evident in the way she would rest her head on his knee when he sat on the floor to check her wound. He cleaned it twice a day with warm salted water, his large, calloused hands surprisingly gentle. On the third morning, the storm broke. Sunlight, brilliant and blinding, streamed through the windows, illuminating a world transformed, buried in a sea of pristine white. The power flickered back on. With it came the return of the outside world. He knew he needed proper supplies. Real puppy food, antibiotics for Sheba's leg. The nearest town, Blackwood Creek, was 12 miles down the mountain, and he had no idea if the roads were even passable. Just as he was contemplating the logistics of digging out his truck, he heard the chug of an engine. He looked out the window to see an old rust-pocked Jeep making its way up his long driveway, a plume of exhaust smoke trailing behind it. It was Eleanor Vance. She was his closest neighbor, though close was a relative term in these mountains, her own small farm being over a mile away. She was a woman in her 70s, small and wiry, with a face mapped by kindness and loss, and eyes that saw far more than most people were comfortable with. He had exchanged little more than polite nods with her in 2 years. He watched as she got out, bundled in a heavy coat and carrying a large wicker basket. He felt a surge of resentment, an intruder. He opened the door before she could knock. "Eleanor," he said, his tone flat, blocking the doorway with his frame. She smiled, unfazed by his frosty reception. "Alex, figured the storm hit you pretty good. I saw your smoke, so I knew you still had wood, but I brought you some stew and fresh bread." My generator kept the freezer going. Her eyes flickered past him into the cabin and widened slightly. She saw the box of puppies, the mother dog lying by the fire. Her smile softened. "Oh my," she whispered. "Looks like you had some company during the storm." Defeated, Alex stepped aside and let her in. The fortress had been breached again. Eleanor moved into the room with a quiet authority, placing the basket on the counter. The smell of beef stew and yeast bread filled the cabin, a scent of home that felt alien and achingly familiar. She did not comment on the mess. Instead, she walked over to the mother dog, kneeling down with a soft groan. "Well, hello, beautiful," she murmured, stroking Sheba's head. Sheba, who had tensed at the stranger's arrival, relaxed under her touch and offered a lick to her hand. Eleanor examined the wounded leg with an expert eye. "You did a good job cleaning this," she said to Alex, her back to him. "But it needs a proper antibiotic, or she'll lose the leg, maybe her life." She then peered into the box of puppies, but he immediately tried to lick her nose. "You've got a little hero here," she chuckled. Her eyes found Shadow, cowering in the corner. "And you've got a warrior?" She looked up at Alex, and her gaze was direct, stripped of all pretense. "My son, Michael. He was like that after his first tour in Afghanistan, the quiet one, the one who saw too much." The casual mention of her son, who had been killed by an IED 8 years prior, was a deliberate offering, a bridge built between their two solitudes. Alex felt his throat tighten. He had known about her son, of course. The whole town did. He just nodded, unable to speak. "These little souls," Eleanor continued, her voice soft, "they need more than just a warm fire. Alex, they need a vet, and they need to be registered. Bill Henderson over at Animal Control is a stickler for the rules, especially with strays after a big storm. The mention of Animal Control was like a cold hand on his neck. Rules. Bureaucracy. The idea of these dogs being taken away, separated, put in cages at a shelter was unthinkable. "They're not strays," he heard himself say the words gravelly. "They're with me." Eleanor's knowing eyes held his. "Then you need to make it official. Sarah Jenkins is the vet in town. She's a good woman. She'll help you. I'll call her for you. Tell her to expect you when the plow clears the main road." She stood up, patting his arm. The touch was light, but it felt immensely heavy. "You did a good thing, Alex. A very good thing. Sometimes the things we rescue, end up rescuing us right back. She gathered her empty basket, gave one last look at the small family by the fire, and left as quietly as she had come. Alex stood in the middle of his chaotic cabin, the smell of stew mingling with the scent of dog, and felt the world shifting under his feet. He had a new mission now, to keep his family together. The county plow came through late the next afternoon, a roaring beast of orange metal and diesel fumes that cleared a single lane down the mountain. The reprieve was short-lived. Not an hour later, a different official vehicle, a white pickup truck with the county seal on the door, crunched up his driveway. Bill Henderson, the animal control officer, was a man whose body seemed to be made entirely of straight lines and sharp angles. He had a clipboard in one hand and an air of weary authority. Alex met him on the porch once again, creating a physical barrier. "Afternoon," Henderson said, his eyes scanning the property. "Got a call from one of your neighbors, said you might have taken in some strays during the storm." "I have some dogs." "Yes," Alex said, his tone clipped. "They're not strays," Henderson sighed, a sound he had probably made 1,000 times. "Sir, if they don't have tags and they're not on your property by your own will, they're strays. That's the law. I need to take them down to the shelter for a mandatory 72-hour hold. We check for microchips, assess their health, and if no one claims them, we evaluate them for adoption." The words were a clinical, bureaucratic death sentence. 72 hours, evaluation. The image of Shadow, terrified and alone in a concrete kennel, flashed in Alex's mind. The thought of them being separated or worse was a physical pain. "That's not going to happen," Alex said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous octave that had made hardened men flinch. Henderson was unimpressed. He had dealt with angry men before. "Look, I'm not the bad guy here. It's protocol, especially the mother. She's injured. She needs professional assessment. The puppies are too young to be separated, so they'll stay with her for now. But they all have to come in." He gestured with his clipboard. "It's for their own welfare." "Their welfare is fine right here," Alex countered, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. He was losing control of the perimeter, of the situation. The old instinct screamed at him to neutralize the threat, but the threat was a man with a clipboard and a rulebook. "I'm not asking, sir," Henderson said, his patience wearing thin. "I can come back with a sheriff's deputy, but I'd rather not. Let's just do this calmly." He took a step forward, and at that exact moment, the cabin door, which Alex hadn't latched properly, swung open. Buddy, ever the foolish hero, trotted out onto the porch, tail wagging furiously. He bounded right up to Henderson and began sniffing enthusiastically at the man's boots. Sheba appeared in the doorway behind him, letting out a low, protective growl. She was limping, but stood her ground, a sentinel guarding her pup. The standoff was broken by a flash of movement. Shadow, spooked by the strange man's voice and the tension in the air, darted out from behind Sheba. He didn't run toward the safety of the cabin. He ran toward the only escape route he saw, the open, endless expanse of snow-covered woods. "Shadow, no!" Alex yelled, his voice cracking with alarm. The puppy, a tiny black speck against the vast white, scrambled over the snowbank at the edge of the driveway, and disappeared into the dense forest. Sheba let out a frantic bark and tried to follow, but her injured leg gave way, and she collapsed with a painful yelp. "Damn it," Henderson muttered, his official demeanor cracking for a second. Another squall was moving in, the sky darkening ominously, and the wind picking up again. A puppy, that small, wouldn't last 30 minutes out there. For Alex, the world narrowed to a single point of focus. The rulebook, the officer, the argument. It all vanished. All that mattered was the tiny, terrified creature lost in the wilderness. He turned and sprinted back into the cabin, ignoring Henderson's call to wait. He grabbed the heavy jacket and a flashlight, his mind a cold, clear machine of tactical planning. The light was already failing. The temperature was dropping. He had to find him now. When he came back out, Henderson was standing by his truck, his hand on the radio, a look of conflict on his face. "You're not going out there," the officer said. "It's too dangerous. I'll call in search and rescue." "There's no time," Alex shot back, his eyes scanning the tree line where Shadow had vanished. "They won't get here fast enough. He's my responsibility." He locked eyes with Henderson, and the officer saw something in his gaze that went beyond stubbornness. It was the absolute certainty of a man on a mission, from which there was no retreat. It was not a choice, it was a duty. "He's part of my family," Alex said, the words tasting foreign and yet perfectly true on his tongue. Without another word, he plunged into the woods, following the small, desperate tracks in the snow. The forest swallowed him whole. The wind howled, a mournful symphony that seemed to mock his search. Snow began to fall again, not the gentle flakes of before, but hard, stinging pellets that quickly began to obscure the puppy's trail. Alex moved with a speed and silence that defied the difficult terrain, his senses stretched to their absolute limit. He called the puppy's name, his voice snatched away by the gale. "Shadow, come on, boy." His old knee, the one with the shrapnel still embedded near the joint, began to ache, a dull, throbbing protest against the cold and the exertion. He ignored it. Pain was just data. He pushed deeper, his flashlight beam cutting a frantic, bouncing path through the darkening woods. The tracks were almost gone, filled in by the driving snow. Panic, an emotion he had not allowed himself to feel in years, began to lick at the edges of his control. He had failed Rex. He could not fail this small, terrified puppy. He could not. He stopped, forcing himself to be still, to listen. He closed his eyes, filtering out the roar of the wind, trying to catch any sound, any whimper. Nothing. He was about to move on when a faint noise reached him. A scraping sound. It came from a rocky outcrop 100 yards to his left, near a steep ravine. He scrambled toward the sound, his flashlight beam dancing over the rocks. There, huddled on a narrow ledge, no wider than his boot, was Shadow. He had slipped and fallen, and was now trapped, with a sheer drop of 20 feet below him. The puppy was shivering violently, coated in a layer of freezing snow, his eyes wide with terror. "Okay, boy. Okay." "I'm here," Alex said, keeping his voice calm and low. "Don't move." The ledge was slick with ice. A single misstep would send them both into the ravine. Alex lay flat on his stomach, the cold rock shocking him through his jacket, and began to inch his way forward. The wind tried to tear him from the rock face, a malevolent force intent on claiming them both. "It's okay, Shadow." "I've got you," he murmured, extending his hand. The puppy shied away, pressing himself impossibly flatter against the rock. He was too scared to move. Alex knew he had only one chance. He couldn't risk grabbing him. He had to coax him. He pulled off his glove with his teeth and reached inside his jacket, his fingers searching for the one thing he had, the one piece of comfort the puppy knew. He pulled out Maria's silk scarf. He held it out, letting it flutter in the wind, a fragile banner of hope in the raging storm. "See this. You know this," he said softly. "This is safety. This is warmth. Come on." Shadow's eyes fixed on the scarf. His shivering lessened for a fraction of a second. He took one hesitant step, then another. His paws slipped on the ice, and he yelped, scrabbling for purchase. "I'm right here. I won't let you fall," Alex said, his voice a raw plea. He stretched his arm as far as it would go, his muscles screaming in protest. The puppy, guided by some nascent flicker of trust, crept the final few inches and nudged his nose against the scarf. With a final desperate lunge, Alex scooped him up, pulling the tiny freezing body against his chest and rolling away from the edge of the ravine. He held the puppy tight, shielding him from the wind, feeling the frantic, tiny heartbeat against his own. "I've got you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I've got you." As he staggered back to his feet, cradling the puppy, another flashlight beam cut through the gloom. It was Henderson. The officer had followed him. He stood there, his clipboard forgotten, his face a mixture of awe and disbelief. He had witnessed the entire ordeal. He had seen the lengths to which this grim, solitary man would go for a creature he had known for only a few days. The rules, the protocols, they suddenly seemed like very small, very foolish things. In the face of such fierce, unconditional devotion, Alex walked past him without a word, his only focus on getting Shadow back to the warmth of the cabin, back to his mother. Henderson watched him go, then slowly lowered his flashlight, a decision solidifying in his mind. Back in the cabin, the scene was one of pure, unadulterated relief. Sheba greeted them at the door, sniffing frantically at the shivering puppy in Alex's arms. He placed Shadow down with his siblings, and the mother dog immediately began to lick him clean, her frantic ministrations a powerful display of maternal love. Buddy and the other pup crowded around, adding their warmth to the huddle. Alex slumped into his armchair, utterly spent, his body aching, his emotions scoured raw. He had risked his life for that puppy, and he would do it again in a heartbeat. The realization settled over him, not with a shock, but with a quiet sense of rightness. The fortress was not just breached, it was gone. In its place, something new was being built. A knock came at the door a few minutes later. It was Henderson. He wasn't holding his clipboard. "He okay?" the officer asked, his tone softer, now respectful. Alex nodded. "He'll be fine." Henderson looked from the exhausted man to the family of dogs by the fire. "Look," he said, "the 72-hour hold. It's to ensure the animals' welfare, to make sure they're in a safe and caring environment." He paused, looking directly at Alex. "As far as I'm concerned, my official assessment is that they already are. I saw what you did out there. No one can give them a better home than this." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. "This is Dr. Sarah Jenkins, the town vet. Get them in to see her tomorrow. Get them their shots, get the mother's leg looked at, get them registered in your name. I'll file the report as owner surrendered and reclaimed in the field. It'll be clean." Alex took the card, stunned. "Thank you," he managed to say. Henderson just nodded. "Some things are more important than the rulebook," he said, and with a final glance at the sleeping puppies, he turned and left. Alex looked down at the card in his hand. Dr. Sarah Jenkins. A new name, connection to the world he had tried so hard to shut out. The next day he took them all down the mountain. Sarah Jenkins was a woman with kind, intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor that put both men and animals at ease. She treated Sheba's leg, which was not as bad as he had feared, and gave the puppies their first round of shots, cooing over Buddy's boisterousness and handling Shadow with a gentle patience that made Alex's chest ache. While she worked, she talked, her voice a warm and soothing presence in the sterile clinic. "Eleanor told me about you," she said, checking Shadow's heart. "She said a hero on the mountain had found himself a new squad." Alex bristled at the word hero, but didn't correct her. "They needed help," was all he said. Sarah smiled. "They always do. And sometimes we're the ones who need it more." She finished her examination and looked at him, her expression open and genuine. "You have a good little family here, Alex. If you need anything, food, advice, someone to watch them for an hour, you call me. That's what neighbors do." In the weeks that followed, the cabin transformed. The sterile silence was replaced by the happy chaos of growing puppies. Muddy paw prints became a permanent feature on the floor. Scratched furniture and overturned water bowls were the new normal, and Alex, the man who had lived by rigid discipline, found himself adapting. He built a fence around the yard, giving the dogs a safe place to run. He found himself on his hands and knees, playing tug-of-war with Buddy and a piece of old rope. He spent hours just sitting on the floor, allowing Shadow, who was slowly coming out of his shell, to crawl into his lap and sleep. Eleanor and Sarah became regular visitors. Eleanor would bring food and wisdom, sitting in Maria's chair, which no longer seemed so empty, and sharing stories of her own life. Sarah would come by to check on the dogs, but her visits grew longer. often ending with them sharing a cup of coffee on the porch as the sun set over the peaks. They talked about the town, about the mountains, and sometimes, in quiet, halting sentences, Alex would talk about his past. He spoke of Rex, of Maria, not as ghosts that haunted him, but as memories that had shaped him. The grief was still there, a part of his landscape, but it was no longer a glacier. It was a river, flowing through him, its banks green with new life. One crisp autumn evening, a year after the storm, Alex sat on his porch steps, a harmonica in his hand. It had been Maria's gift to him, something he used to play to pass the long quiet hours on deployment. He had not touched it since her death. Sheba, her leg now fully healed, lay at his feet, her head on his knee. Buddy was chasing fireflies in the yard, a clumsy, joyful dance in the twilight. And Shadow, no longer a worrier, but a calm, confident young dog, sat beside Alex, leaning his weight against him, a silent, steady presence. Alex brought the harmonica to his lips. He hesitated for a moment, then began to play, a simple, bluesy tune, the notes floating out into the cool mountain air. The music was sad and sweet, full of loss and love, sorrow and hope. It was the sound of a man who had finally come home. He had been sent on one last rescue mission into the heart of a winter storm, and in saving the lives of a lost and broken family, he had, at last, managed to save his own. He had found his new mission, not in war, but in the quiet, profound duty of care. He had found his new squad, and his fortress of solitude was now and forever a home.